I'm Paul Spence from King's College London, and together with Naomi Wells, I co-convene the Digital Model Language Seminar Series, which aims to bring together and raise the visibility of language-based study that engages with digital culture, media, and technologies at all levels of education. And we'd like to welcome you today to this seminar on virtual exchange. Telecollaboration and virtual exchange have increasingly become important features of higher education in recent years, and during the lockdowns imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have been exposed to a variety of forms of online communication and collaboration. These experiences have given more focus to debates about critical digital literacies and pedagogies, and to the affordances and limitations of digital platforms we've often hurriedly been forced to use as a result. In this digital model languages seminar today, we wanted to invite an expert in virtual exchange and telecollaboration to address some of the particular challenges we face in online learning environments involving exchange. And one of these issues is how we can create open, constructive, and interculturally balanced and meaningful exchanges using platforms which are often imbued with hidden assumptions and in a context of diverse digital experiences in relation to access and literacy. Language education has a long history of engaging with geographic and cultural borders and inequalities. In 2012, the LLT journal dedicated a special issue to hegemonies in computer-assisted language learning, which highlighted the fact that most early learning management systems were, to quote, developed in the Anglophone world and reflect to a large extent that cultural environment, and represented digitally driven design principles rather than language community imperatives. So it gives us great pleasure to have Mirjam today with us to talk about her work, which explores how critical digital literacies can help overcome digital inequality and marginalization, and looks at how, in her words, virtual exchange tasks can be designed to develop a critical lens through which language learners examine linguistic and non-linguistic features of digital media, their biases and assumptions. Mirjam is Associate Head for Internationalization, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in the School of Languages and Applied Linguistics at the Open University. She's published widely on the use of technologies for the learning and teaching of languages and cultures, with a strong focus on virtual exchange contexts in particular. Her work covers aspects such as learner and teacher autonomy, intercultural communicative competence, and critical digital literacies. And she's president of the European Association for Computer-Assisted Language Learning, EuroCall, and associate editor of the Call Journal. She's also on various other editorial boards in the field. And she's founding board member of unicollaboration.org, a cross-disciplinary professional organization for telecollaboration and virtual exchange in higher education. Yeah, so I'll just pass over to Mirjam, who's going to talk to us today on addressing linguistic, cultural, and digital hegemonies in virtual exchange. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. And thank you everybody who is here today. I see a few familiar faces. That takes a little bit away from my performance anxieties. I'm grateful that you are here. These are my talking points. I am going to start, for the uninitiated in particular, by giving a definition of virtual exchange, and I'm also going to talk briefly about the two main virtual exchange models. I will also address virtual exchange in relation to internationalization at home, strategies in relation to COVID-19, obviously, and in relation to climate change. After that, I will come to the challenges, the focal point, issues of equity and power, hegemonies, linguistic, cultural, digital hegemonies in VE and how they can be addressed. But interestingly enough, you will find that my talk might just as well be entitled Addressing Linguistic, Cultural and Digital Hegemonies Through VE. And you will find out how and why. This will bring me automatically to virtual exchange that is informed by critical digital pedagogy and based on critical digital literacy skills. Virtual exchange that is used to develop critical digital literacy skills. And then all of that applied to a concrete example. And I'm very, very grateful that the two educators that I mentored in the context of the Evolve project, evidence validated online learning through virtual exchange. Who are the brains behind the Reading the City project are here with me today. And then finally, in my takeaway, I will make the point for critical virtual exchange. So bear with me, there is going to be a bit of cognitive lifting in the first half of the talk, but it's going to become very concrete, very applied, and very practical in the second half. Okay, virtual exchange, what is it? It is a practice that is supported by research and that consists of sustained technology-enabled people-to-people education programs or activities in which constructive communication and interaction takes place between individuals or groups, and now the important bit, who are geographically separated and are from different cultural backgrounds. And all of this with the support, with the guidance of educators or specifically trained facilitators. So it combines the deep impact of intercultural dialogue and exchange with the broad reach of digital technology. These are now the two main models that are currently around. One model is that of the ready-made exchanges which are developed and managed by specialist organizations that enter into partnerships with universities where the exchanges are either integrated into courses or offered as standalone courses. You might be familiar, you might have heard of the Solea Connect program or the programs offered by the Sharing Perspectives Foundation. Now, another form of virtual exchange are exchanges that are collaboratively designed and implemented by two or more university educators who want to integrate an international and intercultural dimension into their existing courses. Here, the partners can come from the same disciplinary field, but exchanges can also be interdisciplinary. For example, you have students of media studies in one institution and students of medicine in another. Yeah? And thereby you bring different disciplinary as well as different cultural perspectives into the classroom. This is one for you. You will get my PowerPoint slides. Behind this link at the top, you find a more comprehensive introduction to virtual exchange for those who are not familiar with it at all. Now, in higher education, many see virtual exchange as the solution to internationalization at home, a term that was coined in 1998 by Bengt Nielsen at Malmö University in Sweden, when a growing migrant population made it clear that there was a need for intentional intercultural learning between domestic and international students. Internationalization at home has since been defined as the purposeful integration of international and intercultural dimensions into the formal and informal curriculum for all students within domestic learning environments. And for the purpose of my talk, I see internationalization at home and internationalization of the curriculum as synonyms. Now, institutional internationalization at home strategies are usually driven by the fact that the majority of higher education students are not internationally mobile. But the universities are still seen as responsible for preparing students for a global society, for a globally interconnected world, to use some of the buzzwords, by helping them develop their international intercultural skills. And these are umbrella terms for a whole range of so-called soft skills or transversal skills. We are talking about openness, curiosity, empathy, collaboration, teamwork, problem solving, foreign languages, obviously, critical thinking, conflict management, to name but a few. And the internationalization at home through virtual exchange trend has been reinforced and continues to be reinforced by a growing number of educators who are concerned about the sustainability and the environmental impact of international mobility, and who call for other and more climate neutral forms of mobility and exchange. This is to say, I'm not one of those who think that virtual exchange should replace physical exchange. I think there's a place for both and that they can complement each other very well. And if you want to hear more about that, we can talk about it during the question and answer session. And last but not least, the pandemic has added its own weight to the argument in favor of virtual exchange. During a 2020 webinar, Mary Lou Forward, she's the director of the Center for Collaborative Online International Learning at the State University of New York, she said, in this time of remote teaching and learning, VE is a way to connect and engage learners and give them meaningful and authentic assignments. And that's why we focus on project-based collaborations with real-world consequences. We live in a time of tremendous social change, and people are demanding social justice and the need to make sustained connections, to understand where other people are coming from, to be able to transform our own societies into the kinds of places we want for the future, is another reason that's driving institutions to think about intercultural diversity and international diversity. The Center for Collaborative Online International Learning, COIL, is virtual exchange on the other side of the Atlantic, so to speak. So she's talking about the same educational intervention. And so we were very happy because it seemed that finally virtual exchange was moving from the margins towards the center of the educational landscape, and is now no longer a mere bottom-up phenomenon led by individual pioneering educators like myself, but I'm sure many others in the virtual room here today. Now, I totally echo all of the aspects of the argument in favor of virtual exchange. But here and today, I want to address some of the challenges that are associated with this, with VE. And these challenges, they are starting to be identified and explored in published VE literature. And they are based on the fact that we realize that virtual exchange, in fact, any online learning and teaching, is as prone to suffer from hegemonies and unequal power dynamics that we know about from face-to-face classroom settings. Now, Helm 2020 reminds us that the knowledges which are made relevant in virtual exchange and the terms under which the exchanges take place can be influenced by many different factors. The teaching partner's academic positions, the linguistic competence of the teachers, the linguistic competence of the students, access or lack of access, experience or lack of experience with technology. There might be institutional constraints, there might be lack of support, lack of acknowledgement, lack of rewards. There might be issues related to gender, race and age, and there might also be geopolitical issues at play. An obvious example is the dominance of English in virtual exchange. Now, because of their transnational nature, virtual exchanges are often, not always, but often implemented in English, although it's not necessarily the participants' first language. And so voluntarily or involuntarily, this turns virtual exchange into what is known into an English as a medium of instruction exercise. And Helm, again, Helm 2020, she explores these EMI-related challenges with regard to virtual exchange. She draws on scholars whose work is grounded in theories of post-colonialism and coloniality, like Andreotti and de Souza. And she introduces de Souza's concept of ecologies of knowledge into virtual exchange research, a concept which captures the epistemological diversity of the world. She also talks about cognitive injustice, which refers to Western marginalization of certain forms of knowledge, mostly those located of what's called the global South. Another example are advances in educational technology and resources that are taken for granted in developed countries. Reliable electricity, high bandwidth internet access, fast Wi-Fi, powerful devices. But we are talking about developed countries. So it's not surprising that digitization has not yet had a globally transformative impact on education, and that it has not yet led to greater equality and inclusion, which was one of the promises. If anything, the pandemic has clearly shown, the pandemic and the worldwide move to online education have clearly shown how an inexistent or lack of technology access has actually exacerbated inequality and exclusion. And the political and social dimensions of technology use tend to be underestimated, as are the power dynamics created by educational practices. The prioritization, the fact that some knowledge get prioritized, which reinforces social and epistemic inequalities and injustices. I wanted to actually read this out here to you because it comes from Selvin and Faeser. Both English and technology can serve as tools in higher education to facilitate the exchange and sharing of knowledges between people from linguistically and culturally diverse areas of the world. It is thus important to be aware of the political and social dimensions of the ways in which English and technology are being used and the power dynamics that educational practices create, the extent to which our educational practices may be prioritizing certain kinds of knowledges and reinforcing social and epistemic inequalities and injustices. And here is an example. This is an abstract from last year's IVEC conference, International Virtual Exchange Conference. It was hosted in Newcastle. It all happened online in September. Just look at this. At present, technological development is advancing extremely fast. Unfortunately, in certain regions of the planet, these advances are limited by political, economic, and social circumstances, such as Venezuela. In 2019, Venezuela was ranked 175 out of 176 by Speedtest, the internet diagnostic portal, behind Yemen, Algeria, and Vanuatu, and only surpassed by Turkmenistan. Despite the adversities, Venezuelan universities struggle to survive, always fighting back and taking firm steps towards the future. And here it comes. In 2019, at the height of the crisis in Venezuela, students of communications of the Andrés Bello Catholic University were assigned an important challenge to take a joint course with students from SUNY in 100% virtual mode. They're talking about a virtual exchange. And then in their presentation, they talk about the titanic challenge this was for them because of access issues. Access to technology, and some of them could not speak English very well. And on the other side, they would not speak Spanish very well, some of them. So a lot of challenges that needed to be addressed in that exchange. So I hope I have convinced you that there is a need for more systematic scholarly inquiries into issues that are related to equity and power in online learning and teaching in general and in virtual exchange in particular. Yeah? How equity and power operate in the digital spaces we use, including the digital spaces we use for virtual exchange, and how they shape ways of thinking and doing that perpetuate social and cultural inequalities, both online and offline. And I think these issues need to be brought to the fore in the exchanges themselves, in our research into virtual exchange. We need to take a critical stance, and we need to start to unpick some of the assumptions and ideologies in the discourses that surround the use of educational technologies, virtual exchange-based internationalization at home being one of them. And virtual exchange, critical virtual exchange that is informed by critical digital literacy skills development and critical digital pedagogy is in fact, at the same time, in my view, the ideal context to explore these issues, to address them. Why? Because virtual exchange is by default mediated through technology. Hence my point earlier, it is about addressing issues of linguistic, cultural, and digital hegemonies in virtual exchange. But it is also about addressing issues of linguistic, cultural, and digital hegemonies through virtual exchange. Now, in my work, I have argued that digital literacy provision needs to be anchored in real-life settings and needs to take account of the wider socio-political context, which is actually also important for our understanding of the broader concept of digital citizenship. And only if we do that can we and our learners begin to see the problems that come with our often uncritical consumption of technology. Okay, digital literacy provision anchored in real-life settings. Virtual exchange happens in real-life settings, and these settings are by default mediated by technology. That's why it provides an ideal setting for such contextualization, socio-political contextualization, and for fostering critical consciousness and agency in the spirit of Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy. So in my work, I make the case for critical digital literacy, the way it has been framed by Darwin, and critical digital pedagogy, the way it's been framed by Morris. Critical digital literacy, Darwin says, the capacity to examine linguistic and non-linguistic features of digital media, their biases and assumptions, in order to verify information and to access the truth. And critical digital pedagogy understanding is the understanding the multitude of ways that digital identity can be built, compromised, and protected, discovering methods for establishing presence and voice, and to reach out to others who are trying to discover the same. Such a pedagogy considers the impact the digital has on our lives, which is why I think that there is kind of a natural fit between critical digital literacy and intercultural literacy, which can both be developed in the conversational spaces of virtual exchange. Now, here comes the but. Might there be a double bind though? Then virtual exchange environments, the spaces, the environments that we use in virtual exchange are not ideologically neutral. They do steer learners to normative behaviors and meanings, and they do shape how learners position each other, how they perform identities, and how information is legitimated and distributed. And I'm quoting Helm 2019. And we know very well that online technologies have been used, or rather abused, to polarize communities, to entrench hate, and to radicalize youth in particular. And they have allowed individuals to self-segregate in online echo chambers. And the online communication spaces that we use, including those in virtual exchange, they're not inherently equitable. Learners have different levels of digital literacies, multimodal communicative competence, and semiotic skills. Why? They need to understand the semiotic potentials of a much wider range of resources in digital spaces, as Bessemer and Press 2016 put it. So while virtual exchange does open opportunities for students, including those who cannot go abroad, we need to consider whether the online spaces used for the exchanges are inherently equal, or more specifically, whether they perpetuate face-to-face inequalities, or maybe even create a different new kind of digital inequalities. In Mirjam Hauck and Sattar 2019, my colleagues and I use Bourdieu's concept of symbolic power and Crumpsh's idea of symbolic competence. And we argue that those learners who can represent their meanings and identities effectively online by capitalizing on the affordances of the modes and media available, that is, with symbolic competence, that those learners will have comparatively more symbolic power than their peers. And we suggest that virtual exchange can actually be a sandpit for learners to experiment with online meaning making and identity representation, and in this way become aware of power dynamics implicated in digital social practices. We also argue that such awareness will enable them to overcome inequalities that stem from varying levels of symbolic power, and to become inclusive by supporting others in having a presence and having a voice online, which brings us back to Morris's understanding of critical digital pedagogy. Now, critical digital literacy, the way I've just framed it, and here is Darwin's quote again, helps us understand how technologies are used in situated and encultured ways, how the material dimensions of online spaces can be indicative of dominant ideologies, economies, and institutions. Okay, so what needs to happen for all this awareness raising to take place, etc.? We tried to tackle that to some degree in the context of the Evolve project. This is where it's now becoming very concrete, you might be relieved to hear. Evolve evidence-validated online learning through virtual exchange. The aim was to mainstream VE as an innovative form of collaborative international learning across disciplines and higher education institutions in Europe and beyond. You probably know that the beginnings of virtual exchange is telecollaboration, and telecollaboration was originally limited, or the thing in languages and cultural learning. So we offered dedicated training for educators in critical digital literacy skills. Yeah, and we used a pre and post survey and an e-portfolio to capture their experiences during the process. Obviously, they went through a virtual exchange type of experience, being trained in critical digital literacy skills development. The idea being that they then find partners and implement an exchange themselves, and maybe also make critical digital literacy skills development the focal point of the exchange. So one training module out of 5 dedicated to critical digital literacy. Just very quickly to give you an idea what we use in the training. It is available for free if you go to the evolve.eu project site. Everything is an open educational resource. Under resources on the project site, you can download each training module, including this one, and with a link to the resources that we used. So here, very quickly, we used an extract from a keynote by Maren Diepbell. She's the CEO of ALT, the United Kingdom's Association for Learning Technology. The title of her talk was "Who Shapes the Future of Learning Technology?" Then we used a collection of blog posts on critical pedagogy by Jean-Michel Morris. Please go and explore his website, not just the blog posts. He is the director of the US-based Digital Pedagogy Lab. That is an international professional development gathering for educators who are committed to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we drew on the work of Mark Brown. He is the director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at DCU. And the work of Ron Darwin, you have seen, I quote him quite a lot, who is an assistant professor in applied linguistics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And the aim was that the trainees find out how they can use virtual exchange, the teacher trainees we're talking about, how they can use virtual exchange to address issues of language and culture in a way that avoids linguistic and cultural hegemonies, and issues of digital literacy in a way that overcomes technological determinism and that tackles some of the bigger issues confronting humanity. And we show how virtual exchange participants can be guided to take a first step towards becoming more aware of how power operates in digital spaces and shapes ways of thinking and doing that are implicated in social and cultural reproduction. And the key are tasks, virtual exchange tasks, that are designed to develop, Darwin calls it, a critical lens through which learners examine, and you've heard it before, linguistic and non-linguistic features of digital media, their biases and assumptions, in order to verify information and access the truth. Just to give you an idea what this pre-post survey was about, the kind of questions we asked. So this one is an interesting one. I'm able to explain how different digital modes of interaction, oral, visual, written, may impact how communication plays out and how we perceive others online. So just to give you an idea of what we were after with our survey. Or number 5, I can recognize the potential bias in online information and communication through different media. Obviously, this is all self-reported data. But here you see the difference between pre and post. So there was some awareness raising. Green is post, blue is pre. The report on the entire project with a bespoke section on critical digital literacy skills is also available, also downloadable from the Evolve project site, including the executive summary. So if you are interested in that, go and get everything from that site that you want. It's all freely available. Here is an example from the triggers that we used in the e-portfolios with the trainees. And then we offered these e-portfolios also to the trainees, the teachers, to use in their virtual exchanges that they subsequently designed and implemented. Give one example that illustrates that you have critically engaged with computer-mediated communication during the exchange. That is, that you have considered the different ways, the channels of communication used during the exchange allowed you to interact with others, the different ways these channels prevent you from interacting with others, and the impact of this on how you perceive others. Yeah. There were other triggers. Again, the portfolio is also available as an open educational resource. And now we come to a very, very concrete example. And I think this is Reading the City. That was a project designed by Marlin and Katarzyna Kasia. They're both here in the audience. I've seen them earlier. So I take no credit. I just accompanied them on their journey after the training until they implemented their virtual exchange together. And there was a third colleague. So these were the 3 colleagues and their institutions involved in this virtual exchange, because tridents are becoming also more and more popular in VE. We normally think there is one group of learners here and one group of learners there and 2 educators, but tridents are becoming very, very popular. And of course, they make also for a richer mix in every respect. If you consider that each classroom is multicultural already, and then you bring these 3 classrooms together, so you have potentially many different cultural lenses through which you can explore issues. And this is the original project outline. I have to say straight away that implementation phase was in the middle of the pandemic, and they really had to think outside of the box, because their plan was that part of the work the students would be doing would be going out into the city to collect data for their project. Obviously, in lockdown, that was not possible anymore. So they became totally reliant on the digital. So let's have a look at this. An amazing example for how you train for critical digital literacy skills and intercultural skills at the same time. Project encourages you to develop your critical, creative, and digital skills by collaboratively studying the city as text. Focus is on critical multiliteracy and the promotion of intercultural communicative competence through first-hand experience of virtual exchange in cross-cultural groups. The task sequence involves popular, critical, and personal studies of place. You will explore the potentials of multimodal meaning making by comparing and discussing official visitor websites depicting your respective cities. First, you focus on the particular stories and values that these websites promote. Then, you select and share some examples of how your cities figure in the news and in aesthetic texts such as literature, poetry, music. The aim is to identify some controversial issue specifically linked to your city. This could concern topics such as segregation, poverty, crime, different kinds of prejudice, pollution, or what else, and develop a project on the basis of that. And the beauty of this is, and this is, I'm really on a mission as far as this is concerned, that this is a project that is 100% aligned with one of the United Nations Strategic Development Goals. In this case, goal number 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Yeah, I think if we really want to do politically relevant work through virtual exchange, if we really want social justice, if we really want to do hegemonies, aligning each and every virtual exchange with one of the main goals or the sub-targets of the United Nations Strategic Development Goals should be our aim. And then you get the slides. You can also have a look at one of the outcomes. This is one of the groups that work together. Obviously, as I say, they had to rethink because they couldn't study the CDA text, or their textual studies were limited to what was on their screens, whereas they went at it originally with a much larger idea of what text meant. Yeah, you can see this also already by include paintings, visuals, music, etc., poetry. Okay, and with this, so there is a link where you can watch this, yeah. And again, they also participated in the dissemination activities of the Evolve project. So again, if you go to the evolve.eu project site, we had 3 main dissemination activities, webinars. One was in September, and at the webinar in September, the learners were there. Marlin was there, Kasia was there, Cecilia was there, but some of the learners were also there, and they spoke at that dissemination webinar about their takeaway from the experience. And with this, I want to make the case for critical virtual exchange. I think we are ideally positioned to use this pedagogical intervention as a vehicle for action and change through multiple touch points. So ideally, once you have a partner, and I'm sure Marlin and Kasia can say a little bit more about this, don't just engage in one exchange. Try to make it something that you do all the time, every term or every other term, maybe with the same partner, but with new student cohorts, so that you can look at short, mid, and long-term impact. And make sure that your virtual exchange design is informed by critical digital pedagogy, so that it helps the learners to find out how they can systematically reach out to others who want to have a voice online, how they find their own presence and voice online first, but then how they can reach out to others who want to have presence and voice online, how they can use virtual exchange to address linguistic, cultural, and digital hegemonies, how through virtual exchange we can advance equity, inclusion, and social justice. And then, big goal, aim for global fairness in the digital space, promote critical internationalization at home, and contribute to shaping the next normal. And with this, I say namaste.
That was wonderful. Thanks so much, Mirjam. Such a stimulating presentation. I mean, I was jotting down so many of those references. I've put in the chat that Mirjam's happy to share her slides, so we'll post these on our website shortly after the seminar. So don't worry about noting down all those references. But yeah, I loved the combination of the kind of theoretical, but also showing us practical ways of doing this in practice and giving us all, I think, a lot of inspiration for how we can all implement this in our own practices. So I will open up to questions. I'll just summarize comments. As I say, do raise your virtual hand if you'd like to ask a question or share a comment with your voice. But we do have a few comments from the chat, which I'll just summarize. So there's a few comments from Sebastian. As I say, Sebastian, do raise your hand if you'd like to explain any of these points in, in a bit more detail. But Sebastian, yeah, I don't know if you want to, I think you've asked a bit about channels of communication, who uses them for what purposes, and a bit about the linguistic landscape. But yeah, Sebastian, if you want to ask.
Sure, I'll just do it. Hi, Mirjam. Thank you so much
Hello.
for your presentation. It's good to see you again. I was sort of riffing off of what you were saying in the chat, so I'm not sure it's always coherent. But what you were saying about the link between digital hegemonies and what you were saying about the channels of communication, I always find it interesting that when talking about these things that now we all, Zoom has become a verb, right? So we're going to Zoom, and except that not everybody is on Zoom necessarily. And when I'm thinking about what people use for their daily lives, I live in the North American context where people use Messenger a lot, or Instagram now, or et cetera. But when I communicate with my colleagues or family in Europe, we almost exclusively use WhatsApp. And then I have a whole bunch of Chinese students who are completely foreign to both of these platforms because they spend 99% of their lives on WeChat. And so when you're talking about these transnational sort of communication and what people do in these channels of communication, the very fact that they don't even exist on the same channels of communication, and that they look at one or the other as something that is foreign to them, is already putting a tension in even the conditions of possibility of even engaging in an exchange and deciding on a medium. So that's what I was thinking about as you were showing that big map of the globe there with the with all of the lines of communication. So anyway, I don't know if you wanted to expand on that, how this gets sorted, I suppose, in real life,
Yeah, I mean, in the VE training, we always encourage the educators to start with the lowest common denominator. Yeah, and very often, surprise, that might be email exchanges for the educators. Yeah, and we also always say, depending on what you want to do, so the pedagogy first, the outcome in your exchange, because that you have to agree on first, and then you travel backwards from there. Look at what kind of technologies are out there, and that allow your learners to achieve that outcome in ways they could not achieve them otherwise. Yeah. And then you have to look what is available to all of them. And this is also where tridams become so interesting, because you have three parties from three different corners of the world who have to agree on in terms on the pedagogical level, and then also explore together technologies and choose the ones that are accessible to all of them, yeah, and explore the advantages and disadvantages of what they all have access to, and also ask, why is it that you don't have access to that and I don't have access to the other, yeah? What is the socio-political context? That's exactly what I'm talking about. But most importantly, I say to every teacher trainee, try everything out yourself, because the digitally also well-versed youngster is one of the biggest urban myths of the 21st century so far. And I'm not talking about being able to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on Snapchat or Instagram, a like, or I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about multimodally informed use of affordances technology offer. That's why I say, before we do anything else, we should actually train, teach in teacher education, but also our learners, independent of the subject matter, on how to develop and have at their hands, virtual hands, a semiotic budget that they can go then work with when they go online. Does it kind of address the issue you were raising, Sebastian?
Oh, precisely. I mean, this is brilliant, because you know you realize that how many things need to come in alignment and need to be discussed even before you can, before you get to day one, right? Which, again, I agree with you. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying that we take a lot of things for granted that evidently we shouldn't. Yeah, and I love the point you ended on, which is this idea of the myth of the digital natives, because it's exactly that. I think it's a myth, right? I mean, you know, you have students at various stages who have this agility with the digital medium in some areas and not at all in others, because the online discourse communities have been so fragmented, as you alluded to, both in terms of the media, but also in terms of their content, that there is no telling what people will absorb.
There's also the aspect of space invasion. That's something that is associated with leisure, then all of a sudden becomes kind of taken over by education, you know, even in informal ways. Hey, but that's another talk.
Yes. I don't want to monopolize Naomi, so feel free to. But I just was, if you unpack things, and I don't know if the palimpsest comment is going to make any more sense. So I'm happy to return to this later. You moderate.
No, if you go ahead, if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Because when we're talking about the city as text, it also send me back to that metaphor of the city as palimpsest, because I think that as opposed to text, because text to me refers to something visible and refers also to then something, a space that has been curated, perhaps, so then the question of visibility comes into question, which is what traces have been erased in a particular space. That's what sent me back to this idea of to this notion of palimpsest, is how do we need to dig so that we can make the invisible visible. And and just to give you a quick example, recent that I ran into listening to a podcast called the Big Payback with Eric Alexander and a gentleman whose name escapes me at the moment, but they were talking about walking around in New York City, and within sight of Wall Street, where everything's visible. It's big, it's shiny, it's you have the big middle-aged bull and all that stuff, and right there is also the site of the one of New York City's largest slave market, and that is not at all visible to and Eric Alexander saw this, and I don't know if you know her, she's a black actor, and she just burst into tears, and she's like, I am from here and I've walked this space millions of times, And why don't we make a bigger deal of this? Because there is a sort of willful or ignorant, blissful ignorant aspect of erasing certain aspects of cultures and history that we're uncomfortable with. And so then you're left with reading the wrong city in a way, or at least a partial view or a partial text of the city. And so that's where the comment went.
Yeah. I think that example of the task design for a virtual exchange that I just shared with you, Marlin's and Kasha's and Cecilia's idea, is a perfect example of a way how that can be counteracted, and where virtual exchange is really the most meaningful way of doing, though, because you bring so many different perspectives together from 2 or 3 different places. I also see a question from Mark. The Evolve training mentioned still available. Yes, I mean the training content is available, but if you want to train, Mark, or if you want somebody else to be trained, it is Uni Collaboration indeed that offers the training.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's going to become a quick practical one. But the other question we got in the chat was from John Bradley. So he asks about interpersonal skills, so body language, emotional intelligence, etc. To what extent are these taken into account in these digital spaces in order to create high trust and creative exchanges?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, you've seen this trick. I mean, this is what the e-portfolio was. Some parts of the e-portfolio were about. You probably saw this trigger that I shared with you. That was exactly about getting to the core of these issues. So awareness of the modes, the communication channels, because most environments are multi today, how they allow you to project yourself, to create your presence, how they prevent you from doing that, what you need to do to help others have presence and voice. So all of this is about emotional intelligence. It's about also presence, is also about body language, but not also, obviously. It's also how you present yourself through text, images, etc. And this is exactly what I mean. If we train people in this awareness of the learning environmental context online, yeah, and how they can draw on the affordances or not draw on them, but at least make this an informed choice, is about training in developing your semiotic budget. And I think this is exactly it. We don't do this. It's hardly done. Why in virtual exchange, in a virtual exchange context? Why? This is me thinking this is the ideal context because they're by default mediated by technology. So you get kind of 2 for the price of 1, if you see what I'm trying to say. Or many more for the price of 1. Does it make sense, John? Does that address the issue you have raised, you feel?
Yeah, it says, yeah, I think
okay,
so.
Thank you.
I think that's, yeah, really important, isn't it? The question, I really like that you ask people to reflect on what it's preventing you from doing, I think that's such a key question, rather than just what are you doing, but what are you not able to do here? I think is such an important thing to reflect on. But yeah, I think, John, if you had any further comments, do let us know, John. I think the other, I think those are the main questions. As I say, do feel free to raise your hand if anyone else has one, but I think Paul had a question that he wanted to ask. So.
Yeah, thank you. I've actually got a couple, but I'll start off with one in case other people have questions they want to ask afterwards. You mentioned John Michael Morris, who interests me a lot, and I'm very interested in the work that he does with Jesse Stommel and other people on hybrid pedagogies. I think the concept of hybrid pedagogies is a really interesting one, and kind of in opposition to the kind of rather more instrumental kind of models for mixing online and offline, such as blended learning, which I have problems with, or at least the way that it's presented, it's used. I just wondered if you thought that, if you know of hybrid pedagogies as a concept, and if you think it's useful for the kind of virtual exchange model you're talking about here.
Yeah, I do know their work. I'm familiar with hybrid pedagogies, but I have to tell you, I think even before anything happened online, we had hybrid pedagogy. Because, because we were using different modes in learning and teaching before that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that sense, added ongoing online has added a dimension. I also take issue with what you call the instrumentalist. I think you call it instrumentalist approach to mixing online and offline. I think they say, and I say, you have to choose very carefully what you do online. I'm going to be very, very radical about this. If it doesn't allow you to do a teaching and learning in a way that could otherwise not happen, yeah, something like collaborative online international learning, or if it doesn't allow you to do a learning and teaching that you already do in a better way, so it adds a positive dimension, don't use technology. Stay well clear of it. And therefore, hybrid blended for the sake of it, no way. And I think that's what they say as well. You have to very, very carefully assess, do I want to use this application because it's new out there, it's sexy, I want to be seen as trendy as an educator, or does it really add something? Does it really facilitate learning in a way that could otherwise not happen? Does it make it unique? And if that is not the case, don't touch it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think I totally agree. There's no point in using a particular approach, digital or otherwise, unless you've really, got a good rationale for it. I mean, I guess what I was getting at with the hybrid pedagogy thing was, of course, everything's always been hybrid, but I don't think people thought about it in those terms. I think things have been very polarized until now, and people have said, oh, it's either digital or it's non-digital, when in fact, as you've just said, they've always been hybrid. But I think what it has changed, though, is that our experience, we're more conscious of it being hybrid because we're going in and out, whereas it used to be much more compartmentalized. Oh, I either did this, I went into a call space, or went into that space. And now it's much more, oh, I go to my phone, then I go to a piece of paper, then I go talk with somebody face to face, then I go into another digital. So it's much more dynamic, and the exchanges are much richer and more complicated as a result, because by going in and out of these different digital, non-digital environments, you're gaining and losing things at the same time.
Yeah, the cognitive load is immense.
Yeah.
And that is also something that we don't really train for. I'm sure we could do this better, preparing for dealing with the fatigue, the exhaustion, avoiding it.
Just kind of bring in another question, which talks a bit of kind of more practical costs. So Liam asks about financial costs involved in virtual exchanges. If yes, are they supported by all the partners in a virtual exchange?
Liam knows the answer to that question, but I thank you, Liam, for asking it. It's an important issue that needs to be addressed. And this is one of the challenges. As I say, those who have institutions who have started to embrace virtual exchange as an internationalization at home strategy, an internationalization of the curriculum, are usually more willing also to reward the effort, yeah, and to make sure that there is institutional support, IT people available, etc. However, and anybody who tells you something different is not telling you the truth. The first time you do this, it is a huge labor of love, and you have to want to do it, but it will have an impact on other things that you do. You will, to me, it's like a pedagogical rebirth almost, because you will never look at what you do in your classroom, in your more traditional classroom, in the same way ever again. So it's a pedagogical paradigm shift. If you can do it in the context of training, some of it is for free in the context of these EU-funded projects. If not, of course, your institution has to cough up the money and send you now to training offered by the SUNY Coil Center, by Uni Collaboration, and other outfits. If you want a ready-made program, Sharing Perspectives Foundation, Solia Connect, that costs. And also the teachers who do this need to be given free time. Something else needs to be taken off their shoulders, yeah, so that they can do that work. Liam, is that what you thought I should make clear here? That it's not for free?
Yes, indeed. Yes. Thank you, Mirjam.
Great.
But also to emphasize the rewards that come from this, you know.
Yes.
My colleagues have got greater experience with this, and the effect on students is amazing. It really is amazing, you know, and I don't get to say that often in teaching.
And also it is the takeaway is more than just the immediate virtual exchange experience and the impact it might have on them psychologically, emotionally, etc. It is a huge advantage to be able to say that you've been part of this. It's an employability skill. Yeah, these transversal, these soft skills that I mentioned, you have a claim to make in terms of having acquired these skills to a certain degree in the context of a virtual exchange. Yeah, problem, conflict management, collaborative teamwork, empathy, curiosity, openness. Yeah? I mentioned them at the beginning. And employers are more and more aware of the importance and of the added value of these transversal skills, soft skills.
Okay. I think there's a lot of agreement in the comments. I was going to ask, I think I haven't seen any other questions, but as I say, do raise your hands. I did have a question about the effects of the pandemic, because on the one hand, we might think that everyone suddenly, you know, virtual, or it works, it can do it. But as you probably know, a lot of modern languages departments had to very quickly move virtual in a way that maybe didn't have that, as you say, kind of connecting to what you were saying before, didn't have the time or, you know, the support to be able to put real kind of thought into the design of virtual learning tasks, and whether that has meant some people to say, you know, virtual exchange doesn't work, we've had to, you know, do it. And I just wondered if your thoughts on how the pandemic may not have had just positive, but may have actually increased some people's resistance to it.
I mean, that certainly happened, particularly where there was no support available. But Kasia is here, and maybe you can show your face, Kasia. It also worked the other way around, because Kasia at her university was one of the few ones with experience in virtual exchange. Kasia, you all of a sudden, you became the trainer, you became the pedagogue responsible for training everybody else within 8 days or even less time to go online with all their learning and teaching. I'm talking on your behalf, you're muted, my dear.
Okay. Yes, that's true. Somehow I fell in love, as you say, with virtual exchange, and I wanted to promote it and encourage other teachers at my institution to take part in it. And somehow I got this role of internationalization coordinator for my foreign language teaching center. Now we have like a team of 10 teachers who have never done it and will do it for the first time. And I'm learning how to be the facilitator, how to lead them, how to guide them. It's a new role, but it's fascinating to see it grow. Really, I'm touched. I'm surprised that I'm asked right now. I'm traveling. Yeah, this is growing, and I'm sure we will be successful. Thank you, Mirjam. Thank you for your mentoring. Thank you for the training and everything.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Great. I think, yeah, a couple of the comments, people saying some had early collaboration in place, and so they were able to hit the ground running in the pandemic, and others who are saying it's opened their eyes to the opportunities of virtual exchange that they've never appreciated before. So yeah, some fantastic comments. I think Paul had another question, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a more a practical question. So I run a master's in digital humanities, and we were actually exploring virtual exchange when the pandemic hit, and that's actually ironically probably slowed us down a little bit just because we've been so busy with working out the more mundane aspects of telecollaboration and so on. But it's definitely something we want to explore much more in the future. And I just wondered if you had any more practical advice on the general risks, the general challenges that you face, the general risks of virtual exchange, like intercultural misunderstandings and so on, and particularly around hegemony, around kind of hegemonic behaviors. I mean, you wanted to become a relaxed, friendly, collaborative experience. So how do you mitigate? How do you manage any kind of challenges which arise in that area?
Yeah. First of all, it is crucial that the educators involved click. So the bond between the educator and want their learners to do this is often underestimated. Then the challenges like patterns of participation, peaks and troughs in motivation, all the known challenges that are discussed in the literature, equity, power, now are we talking hegemonies, etc. They need to be brought to the fore in the first phase, in the getting to know each other, icebreaker, warm-up phase. Very often still, these first phases are wasted on work that is somehow related to stereotyping, in the largest sense of the word. I have been making the case that if you want to do something in terms of intercultural differences, awareness raising, engage with the concepts of othering and belonging. There's a fantastic institute for othering and belonging at the University of Berkeley. They put a lot of incredibly good material out there, including talks by their director, John Powell. There you find them on YouTube. Go into this first phase by using material that raises awareness for these issues that might also impede a good learning journey for all involved. The danger of a single story. You know that by Chimamanda Adichie, the TED Talk. That's another one. Start with something like that goes to the core of issues of equity and power. Stereotypes, no. Othering, belonging. You need to get the participants into a certain frame of mind, because being tolerant, benefit of the doubt, being acceptant of silence online, these things need to be learned, because otherwise jumping into conclusions, why someone isn't answering, why they are not pulling their weight, how to do expectation management online, etc. All these things need to be addressed in a not in a heavy way in the initial phase, but they need to be raised, and then learners need to engage, maybe already in cross-cultural subgroups of 4 or 5 or 6 in these initial phases. And then you stand a much better chance for the remainder of the exchange to really get to the core of the matter, to what you want your learners to get out of it. Because you can establish the etiquette, the rules of engagement at the back of this. And the onus is on the participants to do this. This is one of the big mistakes. Virtual exchange or collaborative online international learning done top down, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It has to be also a grassroots experience for the learners. And that's difficult for educators because they're so used to holding on to everything and being in control,
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that's all of the questions, but we've had a really fantastic discussion. And I just want to, and I think, as you'll see, lots of responses in the comments of what people have taken. But I think I'll just take this moment to thank you so much, Mirjam, for both a fantastic presentation and fantastic discussion, and really thought-provoking. as well as giving us really kind of practical ways in which we can really take these ideas forward. So I'd just like to take the moment to say thank you very much on behalf of everyone here, and I think it will be echoed in the comments and with.
Thank you. And if you want more examples, I mean, there are the case studies in the Evolve project, but there are also the case studies on the Uni Collaboration website. A lot of languages related case studies on the unicollaboration.org site.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to know how all of those resources are there. And yeah, as mentioned, the slides will be shared after the session, and we'll also post the recording within kind of the next few days, so probably early next week. Get in touch if you spoke in the discussion. I think it was mainly Sebastian, if you have any issues with being included in the recording. Yeah, great.
And I just want to say thank you for Marlin and Kasia. Yeah, to Marlin and Kasia, because I asked for their permission that they let me use their example. Thank you both. And thank you, Cecilia.
Fantastic. It's all collaboration, isn't it? Not just the collaboration with the learners, but clearly a very collaborative effort.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks everyone for joining us again for this seminar. Hopefully you've seen this year, we've been really interested in having some more pedagogy focused sessions, and we hope we'll have at least one more session in June to kind of wrap up what has been quite a run of pedagogy focus in schools and in higher education. I think Paul has posted links to the website, so we'll update and announce when the recording is live, and also we'll announce any further events there. But that's it. And I think, unless Paul has anything else to add, I think we will say thank you very much again, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.